who's also doing pretty well with Infect, who is just not on our radar at all.
Yeah, and Infect is just a deck whose time has come, I think. This is just, it's weird because this is not a deck that, it's not like there was a card that was printed. You know, it's not like something from a new set put it over the top.
Right.
It's basically just Tom Ross.
Yeah, the boss has taught everyone how to do it.
Yeah, Tom Ross happened. And he came along. And,
as he does.
as he is wont to do. So yeah, Blue-Green Infect, looking to really kind of make its mark as maybe even a tier 1 contender in Legacy, which is not something I thought I would say.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, it is looking that way, though.
Yeah, Webster going to kick off with a Gataxian Probe, seeing a hand of, I believe, 2 fetch lands, Jace, Shardless Agent, Abrupt Decay, Maelstrom Pulse, and Brainstorm. So this is a fair hand. A hand of fair spells.
Yeah, I mean, this hand's not too bad. In the dark, if you don't know what your opponent's playing, this is a very easy keep. Maybe this is a little on the slow side if you know that your opponent is specifically playing Infect, but you do have a Brainstorm to fix your hand and Abrupt Decay as a removal spell, and then hopefully that buys you enough time to fire off stuff like Maelstrom Pulse, maybe get a Jason to play.
Yeah. Now, Abrupt Decay, unfortunately, as flexible as it is, the one thing it cannot hit is land. Well, yeah. And one of the scariest threats in the Infect deck is a land, Inkmoth Nexus, which Matthew Webster does lead with.
Yeah, Shardless BUG typically only playing 2 Wastelands, and that might be kind of a weird number, but it's basically just there to kill utility lands, and in this case, I think Inkmoth Nexus qualifies, right?
Utility, yeah. Murdering your opponent is kind of a utility in a sense.
Right.
So, yeah, Webster has the second land, has an opportunity to activate and swing for 1, is just going to develop his board a little more and stick that Noble Hierarch. Is Noble Hierarch scary enough to Abrupt Decay here?
Yes, I think so. Especially if your plan is to start playing Shardless Agent or Maelstrom Pulse. Like, the fact that you have a backup removal spell in Maelstrom Pulse makes it a little easier to pull the trigger on killing that Noble Hierarch.
Sure.
It might be a little weird to see your opponent go turn 1 Nexus, turn 2 Hierarch, because, you know, what kind of thing had to happen in order for that sort of sequencing to come down? In this case, Matthew kept a hand with 2 probes and no second land. So
yeah.
You gotta think that if he had the Noble Hierarch, he would have just played it on turn 1, right? So the fact that he played on turn 2, maybe he actually needs that mana.
Sure, yeah, you have to assume that he found either the Noble Hierarch or the Tropical Island.
Right.
So yeah, a pretty reasonable thing to fight over, and you're not doing anything else this turn. There's not really an exciting spot to brainstorm in, I don't think.
No, not really. I mean, your hand has action. Maybe you could use an extra land, or maybe you want to shuffle that Jace away. But for the most part, you could pass with the 2 fetch lands open and either Abrupt Decay or cast Brainstorm and fetch, but that's still not really what you want to be doing. I think I like pulling the trigger on the Decay here and just getting that Hierarch out of the way. Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, on Matthew's side, I think this is a pretty sweet turn to fire off a Brainstorm, get the full-blown Brainstorm, the Brainstorm plus Shuffle. So you got to get rid of some excess lands, and now, again, gets the choice, develop his board or start swinging. Has access to a Glistener Elf in hand. But does he want to get some damage on? Nope, just Glistener Elf.
Yeah, I mean, we saw an Invigorate and a Berserk in Matthew Webster's hand, and that's basically the combo right there. That's the combo finish. So if you get to keep presenting infecting threats that Gonzalo basically has to deal with, then you can pave the way for that Nexus to actually get in there and deal the killing blow.
Sure, and as you mentioned, if those 2 cards both resolve, that actually is 10 on its own. So the 1 from Nexus, just from an attack, doesn't really matter, doesn't contribute to that. The one kind of weird factor there for Matthew is he does know that there is a Maelstrom Pulse in Gonzalo's hand. So presenting something convenient to kill at sorcery speed is maybe something you don't want to walk into. But again, I think as you mentioned, that's something that Matthew's actually totally happy with. He kind of wants him to tap out
right
here. But Gonzalo is going to tap out, but not for what we expected. Shardless Agent spins the wheel, conjures up an Abrupt Decay. So kind of functionally the same thing.
Yeah, and I don't mind that because Shardless Agent as a body effectively deals with that Glistener Elf.
Sure.
It's like, sure, if they want to waste an Invigorate to kill my Shardless Agent, I am fine with that.
And Matthew is going to swing, does have the combo kill, is going to go for it. We see a Force of Will in Gonzalo's hand, so some protection here. Force pitching Ancestral. And Matthew has nothing to push it through, but still going to deal 5 Infect.
Yeah, 5 Infect, not bad. You got to be a little disappointed there after you saw your opponent's hand, not just a couple turns ago, right? And they didn't have a Force of Will.
Yeah. And so Maelstrom Pulse going to deal with the Glistener Elf. Wasteland going to knock out that Inkmoth Nexus. And Matthew, no cards in hand, just 3 Tropical Islands in play, halfway there and living on a prayer?
Yes.
Is that a stretch?
No,
Okay.
that's good. That counts.
All right, good. Blighted Agent off the top. So a threat again, although not exactly the fastest clock on its own.
No, not the fastest clock by any means, but it is one that's unblockable, which is probably what Matthew wants.
Right. So Gonzalo's going to fire off a Ponder, takes a look at his 3, quickly says, nah, not those. And so we know about the Jason hand. We see another Brainstorm. So Gonzalo, plenty of action, although not really a lot of interaction at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a Brainstorm to dig him out of it, and he has a Jace the Mind Sculptor to potentially hold that Blighted Agent at bay for a little bit. So Gonzalo, even though he doesn't have the quickest clock, he's still in a pretty good position, I think.
Okay. And Matthew finds a Brainstorm, doesn't waste any time, just cast it and sees what happens.
Yeah, because it's like if you hit an Invigorate off that Brainstorm, you just get to go for it.
Didn't hit the Invigorate, hit the Berserk, which doesn't actually do anything on its own, but would make any other pump spell lethal. Although, as you mentioned, Invigorate actually was just lethal on its own. But gets in the poke for 1 and ships it back to Gonzalo, who does fire off an end-step Brainstorm.
So finds the 4th land, finds a Force of Will, and you got to imagine that Gonzalo is just in a commanding position at this point.
Yeah. If the J sticks, which Matthew does have, yeah, just a Brainstorm in hand, so you can't Brainstorm into an answer. Has Force Will, but wouldn't be able to like dig up Force of Will plus a blue card to pitch.
Right.
So Matthew gonna go digging again. And these are the kind of the Brainstorm locks. He knows this one of his top cards anyway. So.
Yeah. I mean, now he found a Ponder, so he can shuffle.
And has some cards that I think he doesn't mind shuffling away either. That Noble Hierarch's not doing much. I think the card he's looking for here is another Inkmoth Nexus. This is an Infect threat that you can't actually bounce with Jace.
Right. I mean, now Gonzalo's going to be able to bounce the Blighted Agent with Jace, play a Tarmogoyf, and unless Matthew uses that Ponder to find an Inkmoth, he's looking at lethal within the next 2 turns. Maybe even this turn, depending on how big the Tarmogoyf is.
Yeah, the Tarmogoyf would have to be a 5/6, which I believe it is.
4/5. Instant,
4/5, okay.
Instant sorcery creature land.
So again, finds the Berserk. No new cards for Matthew, which is a pretty serious problem. A repeat of Blighted Agent. Not going to go for a Ponder. So I guess just wants to sit on a blue card.
Yeah, wants to save that for Force of Will, but...
Oh, and the Jace.
Yeah, the Jace dying adds the 5th power.
Yeah. So that didn't go as planned for Matthew Webster.
Yeah, I mean, Gonzalo got kind of fortunate to find one of his 2 Wastelands. It's one of the few ways that he has to deal with Inkmoth Nexus.
Oh, does he only have 2?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, most Shardless BUG deck will only play 2.
All right. And yeah, it needed to find it. I think that's the real difference maker. Yeah, we talked about Inkmoth Nexus. You can't Abrupt Decay it. You can't Maelstrom Pulse it. That's basically all you can do against it, right, is Wasteland it?
Right.
So...
Or, you know, at least break their hand down to the point where, like, they don't have enough pump spells, and they're just trying to nickel and dime you out, and then maybe you can race it. Baleful Strix is another card that you can block, but we saw their Infect decks typically play around 2 Berserks to get over that.
Sure. Okay, so these Shardless decks, a lot of times they're kind of blunt instruments in game 1, but they get to sculpt their game plan like much more precisely afterboard. So what is Gonzalo going to be able to do to give him some more of a chance to interact?
Knight of Souls Betrayal as a 1/of.
That's a good one.
An additional Baleful Strix, Seal of Primordium as a 1/of, a couple copies of Disfigure, a Pithing Needle, which also works against Inkmoth Nexus, and additional copies of Thoughtseize and Force of Will if he wants them. And I think one of the best cards in the matchup, he has a 3rd copy of Liliana of the Veil in the sideboard as well.
Okay. So Liliana, an effect that can answer, again, the threats in a way that you can't get around with things like Vines of the Vastwood, and actually just ticking up is a real, like, limiting the volume of cards that the Infect player has access to is a significant
Right,
gain
so
here.
the traditional game that you want to play out when you have Liliana at your top end is like a discard spell into a removal spell into Liliana, kill a creature, and then you start ticking up Liliana and make it so they can never assemble like Invigorate, Berserk plus protection, and you can just kind of tear them apart from that point.
Yeah, this is not. Infect is. It kind of gets compared to Burn in the sense that you want to resolve a big pile of spells.
Right.
But Burn has the luxury of you can play off the tops like draw, bolt you,
right.
Draw, Flame Rift you, or
draw,
whatever.
Invigorate, and then discard it is
right.
typically what happens when Liliana is active.
Yeah, Infect actually has to kind of chain its spells together all in one turn. The sideboard of this Infect, these Infect decks they're so bizarre because they feel kind of like aggro decks, but then they have a lot of kind of tempo-y elements.
Yeah.
And it is, I think there's a lot of like wiggle room in terms of like how you want to position yourself. Basically, I think in this matchup, you just want to try and be a little more resilient against interaction. So, the full list, the full sideboard here, he has access to 2 Spell Pierce, 1 Flusterstorm, 1 Nature's Claim, 2 Krosan Grip, 2 Grafdigger's Cage, 2 Pithing Needle, 1 Null Rod, 1 Karakas, 1 Piracy Charm, 1 Submerge, and 1 Sylvan Library. Now, a lot of those cards are kind of like precision tools against like other combo decks.
Right.
So you can discount a lot of cards. There aren't really relevant targets for things like Nature's Claim. Grafdigger's Cage doesn't do much. I think basically you're looking at the 1 Sylvan Library, maybe an argument for the Submerge, although I don't love it.
When I played against Tom Ross in the last Invitational, he brought in Swords to Plowshares against me, and it was mostly just as a tool to buy time against something like Tarmogoyf.
Okay.
And I can totally see that argument, and Submerge kind of plays the same role. So
sure, okay.
I definitely think that's probably going to come in here. Sylvan Library is certainly coming in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you have to wade through a pile of disruption out of this Shardless BUG deck.
And so on that note, I think the other cards that are likely to come in are the 2 Spell Pierce and the 1 Flusterstorm, which I'm not excited about.
Yeah,
but
me either.
They still do things.
Like Spell Pierce can hit Liliana. Flusterstorm is only good against a certain subset of cards, so I'm not sure how good that is. That feels more of like an anti-combo card to me.
Yeah, so looking at Matthew's main deck, it's kind of a question of like what does he have room to take out? I don't think you can ever afford to. Can you afford to board out Berserk at any point? Like this doesn't feel like a matchup where the 1-2 punch of like Pump Spell plus Berserk is gonna be that reliable.
It's unlikely to happen, but if the game gets to a point where, you know, Liliana is starting to do its work, maybe you can, you know, cobble that together using a brainstorm and use all of your resources to try and shove on that play to actually combo them out in one turn. And yeah, maybe it won't work out, but at least you have that option as opposed to like, well, okay, now I guess I just have to attack you for 1 over and over and over again.
And the other 2 cards that we saw this card on the list when we were first handed the list and like just like, wow, this is sweet. 2 Steel of Removal in Matthew's list. This is not a stock card in the Infect deck. But having said that, I don't see how great it is here. Yeah, we talked about wanting to bring in Submerge to buy time. Steel of Removal kind of does the same thing. It does it at sorcery speed. It doesn't necessarily buy the same, it doesn't get you the free draw step.
Right, yeah, and that's the key with Submerge, right? Like, at its core, you are trading 1 for 1. You know, you are using a card to make them skip their draw step, and then they have to replay their thing while your Submerge is free. So you're also getting a small tempo advantage there. Seal Removal is kind of the same thing, where it only costs 1 mana, and you're getting a tempo advantage, but they're not skipping their draw step. And how hard is it really to replay a Tarmogoyf?
Sure. So Matthew Webster going to lead off with Glistener. Glistener Elf. Gonzalo has the power 1-drop himself, although not so powerful here. Matthew Webster has the real opportunity to just kill you before that thing ever hits the stack.
Yeah, and that's certainly true, but sometimes you do need that added push going into the mid-game for Ancestral. Like, you've been doing all this work to grind them down, but how do you actually get ahead?
Yeah. So Matthew just pokes, no trickery there, just getting in for 1 Infect, gonna pass the turn to leave up Spell Pierce, and takes care of a Hymn to Rock with it. Shields down again. Matthew, no way to punish, just gonna attack for 2. Again, could have activated Inkmoth Nexus, chose not to, so one suspect sitting on some form of interaction. And there's a Seal of Removal still in his hand, so...
Yeah, he's saving that for his Force of Will, and he's probably going to use a Vines of the Vastwood here to counter an Abrupt Decay.
Counter an Abrupt Decay. That's,
you like that?
Yeah. Abrupt Decay notably says it cannot be countered by spells or abilities. So leaving open just this possibility.
But it can be countered if you have no legal targets.
Sure. So Shardless Agent going to provide a blocker for the Glistener Elf, but not for Inkmoth Nexus. Matthew does still get to make that push. And Ancestral ticks down just 1 turn away. And then Gonzalo doing a pretty good job of kind of giving himself a buffer and playing the interactive game that he wants to play.
Right. It looked kind of dicey when he was on the draw and his first play was suspend Ancestral. Right. A lot of people, like I've been talking to Brad and Todd all day, right? Mm-hmm. And they're just talking about how scared people are of their deck. It's like if you play a turn 1 Glistener Elf, they're just like, oh my god, I can't tap out. I have to kill that thing. Yeah. I can't take my shields down. And Gonzalo's just like, this game's probably going to go pretty long. I'm going to suspend this Ancestral and just be fine with it.
Yeah, if you've got the turn 2 kill, you've got it. But they don't always.
Right.
In fact, I think they often don't. They usually don't, I would even say.
Right. But the fear is there.
Yes. So Gonzalo gonna have a pretty spicy turn. Tarmogoyf into Steel of Primordium. We talked about how Inkmoth Nexus is your most resilient threat against this deck. Steel of Primordium is an answer. An answer that just sits there.
Yeah, conveniently it is a card that you can cascade into and will just sit there.
Mm-hmm. So Matthew can activate Nexus, play Seal of Removal, or well, do it in the other order, but
right, to actually pick up his guy.
Yeah. Wouldn't be able to replay it this turn, unfortunately.
Yeah, again, I mean, he could use Vines to make it untargetable, and that's not a bad way to do it either, assuming you want to save the Seal of Removal for Force of Will.
Instead, just gonna attack. Offering, yeah, obviously you would not make this attack unless you had some kind of combat trick. Gonzalo says, sure, show me. Happy to trade his Tarmogoyf for an Invigorate, a Vines, whatever it would be.
He's at 3 Infect already. If Webster has a +4/+4 effect, he does not want to take that. He would rather just trade Tarmogoyf with that. Ancestral's coming off next turn. Presumably it's going to resolve. Maybe not, though.
Okay, and just as it plays out, yeah, Ancestral hits the stack and hits the bin, it looks like.
Exiling Seal of Removal and...
Hold up, what's that?
What is that?
Yeah, what is going on here? This is a card that the last time we saw this card saw any significant play in Legacy.
Enchantress.
Would have been, the blue, and not just any Enchantress list, the kind of the blue-green combo, the Cuneo Enchantress.
Right.
I miss that deck. I miss that deck a lot. I feel like it's primed for a comeback, actually. Maybe not in this field, but the usual Legacy open field is just a big pile of miracles. I think that was always the deck to prey on.
Yeah.
So, clear board. Gonzalo gets to start swinging, knocks Matthew down to 13. And Matthew gonna fire off a Ponder. Had to use his Vines last turn to get rid of that Tarmogoyf. Had to pitch the Seal of Removal to stop Gonzalo from drawing 3 fresh ones. So not actually any way at present to protect his Inkmoth Nexus. But he is gonna get to start drawing some extras, potentially filtering a little bit. Sylvan Library comes down.
Yeah, so Library typically very good in this matchup, but again, there is a Seal of Primordium sitting in play. Gonzalo has an Abrupt Decay in his hand.
Yeah, that was quick. Get out of there.
Yeah, and it's not like he has a bunch of life, too. Like, Gonzalo's doing his best to put pressure on his opponent.
Yeah. So, fresh threat. 2 fresh threats make it. All right, and yeah, those are pretty solid here. Shardless Agent, I think, maybe is kind of priced into staying back on defense against that Glistener Elf.
Right. And that's not the greatest feeling in the world, right? Because your opponent can just fire up Inkmoth Nexus if he wants to and attack with Blighted Agent. And it's like, you can seal the Inkmoth, but you're still taking 1 a turn. And now it's just like, can I actually stop this before it gets too out of control?
Right, and the Inkmoth, that's still, well, sorry, not the Inkmoth, but the Blighted Agent, that's still a 6-turn clock here. So that feels like a long time. But it's really not that long. Gonzalo kind of out of gas. We've got another Ancestral suspended. That still the full 4 counters, so that's going to take forever. And Vines of Westwood going to close out that clock significantly. That's not lethal, but it's real close.
Yeah, so now he's facing lethal next turn in this Blighted Agent.
Yeah, Blighted Agent pumped up to 5/5. Gonzalo now at 9 poison. Facing down an unblockable Infect threat, a blockable Infect threat, and unblockable but sealable Infect threat.
So really, he has everything covered except for the Blighted Agent.
Yeah, presently, yeah. So needs to find an answer, of which he has already used several. We've seen 2 Abrupt Decays so far. And yeah, even if he does find the answer, again, Matthew at any time can draw a way to punch his other threats through. the insulation that Gonzalo currently has. Fires off a Brainstorm, and I didn't catch a glimpse of anything that actually helps him.
It was 2 fetch lands and a Pithing Needle. So
that one too.
Yeah, definitely nothing that helps him. But Brainstorm was probably the best possible card you could draw there, right? Because it's like you're barely in control, and Brainstorm is the one card that you can draw that might give you more than one answer.
Yeah, you need help, and you would rather take 3 shots than 1. But as it is, I think Matthew Webster's got the win if he's willing to swing for it. He did not draw a blue card to go with his Force of Will, but says, let's try anyway, attacks, and Gonzalo doesn't have it. So on to game 3. And that game was not really, like game 1, that's not really the way Infect draws it up either, I don't think.
Well,
but it still worked.
I think that is how Tom Ross probably wins at least half of his matches.
Okay, fair.
It's not all about just like +4/+4 in your guys, right? You know, sometimes you just present 3 threats and you make them deal with all your stuff. You can rebuild. And then if you get a chance to sneak in some points here and there, that adds up.
Okay. And looks like Gonzalo going back to the well, kind of reconsidering his sideboarding. I feel like this is a matchup where the difference of whether or not you're on the play or the draw probably has a pretty profound effect on how you sideboard. That may be less the case for Gonzalo because as a Shardless deck, he doesn't have access to days.
Right.
But actually, when you're on the draw, is it? No, he will be. Yeah, he'll be on the play actually. So
Gonzalo will be on the play. Webster will be on the draw.
Okay. I feel like on the draw, you probably trim your Ancestral Visions.
Yeah, I mean, Ancestral is not good in the games where you're getting turn 2'd, right?
Sure. Yeah.
There is some merit to it being a blue card, which you don't have many copies of, so it pitches to Force of Will. And there are games like that where the turn 1 Ancestral, it didn't resolve, it got Force of Will, but that's still good, right? You got the Force of Will and the blue card, you traded your 1 Ancestral, your 1 mana for 2 cards of your opponents. Like, that was still pretty good. And the Ancestral at the end was a little too late. And like, maybe that was one that you wanted to hold on to Brainstorm away, or if you Brainstorm into a Shardless Agent, you get to put back that Ancestral and then cascade into it that way. Because it looked like the game was going to end before that Ancestral was going to come off suspend anyway. So there are certainly situations like that where Ancestral might be a little too slow. But I think these games can get kind of grindy.
Yeah, absolutely, as we saw. Yeah, and I think if Gonzalo had resolved that first one, he's probably in. We don't know, but like he's 3 shots deeper to find an answer to that Blighted Agent. I think if he answers the Blighted Agent, he's a pretty big favorite to win that game.
Oh, I definitely agree. And it just so happened that his draws at the end were land, Brainstorm into land, Pithing Needle, and that was not what he needed.
Yeah. Now on Matthew's side, a card that we saw in game 2 that I want to say was probably unlikely to be on Matthew's radar going into game 2 was Seal of Primordium. So
sure.
Do you think that's something that actually affects the way you sideboard? Because again, Inkmoth Nexus is the threat that you actually get to ignore most of Gonzalo's interaction with.
I mean, you might see something like Seal, but it's like how many copies can Gonzalo realistically have of that card? You could board in something like Corrosive Grip or Pithing Needle to take care of it, but you might just be better off playing your normal game and using something like Vines to counter it.
Yeah, likely. Yeah, I think you're right that he's probably only has the 1 copy. I don't think there are any other targets for something like Grip other than Shardless Agent, which is really unexciting.
I mean, you can get a Baleful Strix out of the way, which certainly doesn't feel good, but if that's the type of play that wins you the game, then it's certainly worth it. But that is not a way that I would sideboard in this matchup, I don't think. Okay.
So we're off to game 3. Gonzalo on the play, going to lead off for the Thoughtseize. And we see Glistener Elf, Blighted Agent, Taxian Probe, Invigorate, and Berserk. So that's a turn 2 kill.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's pretty good. Plus, you have Taxian Probe for the information, and it's like, you got to expect to get Thoughtseized, right? You know, Shardless BUG has so much discard between Thoughtseize, him to Turok, and even Liliana that eventually the jig is going to be up. You're going to get Thoughtseized.
Yeah. So this is a tricky one to actually resolve here, this Thoughtseize. So if you take Glistener Elf, you stop Matthew from having a relevant turn 1 play other than like Nexus Go.
Right.
And then if you take Invigorate, then Matthew's kind of like pump spell plan is shut off for now.
Yeah, it's just like a matter of whether or not you can deal with Blighted Agent, Glistener Elf, and Inkmoth Nexus.
Right.
So which plan are you on? If you have 2 relevant removal spells, but maybe not a third, you probably want to just fight the creatures and either take the elf or the blighted agent, whichever one is more difficult for you to deal with. Otherwise, I could totally see taking the invigorate to just buy him a bunch of time, because without invigorate, Berserk isn't doing a whole lot.
Right. So it basically comes down to, like, if you think you can win the fight on the stack, then you just let him keep the pump spells, but just try and kill every creature he ever plays.
Yeah.
And if you think you can win the fight with removal, you can win the fight on the board, then you just... Or I think I got those backwards, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, if you win the fight over the creatures, the pump spells don't matter.
Right.
And if you're able to stop the pump spells, then just leave them, you know?
Yeah.
Try and kill all the creatures.
So he's going to take the invigorate. So Gonzalo basically declaring, like, I can kill whatever you have. But what we see is not a way to kill things.
No, I mean, at least in the case of Tarmogoyf, you have that Glistener Elf on lock.
Okay, sure.
Maybe he's planning on using Force of Will or Maelstrom Pulse to get rid of the Blighted Agent, and then you just have to draw a way to deal with that Inkmoth Nexus.
All right, fair.
Well, first things first, you have to brainstorm into a second land.
Yeah.
I think that's actually step one.
That is definitely the part that ties it all together. Or you could just draw it, but he doesn't. So fires off a brainstorm. Gives away a little information there, actually, because he just immediately plays the one that he draws.
Right.
We do find the land.
Well, it's a land. It is not the land. It's only an underground sea, so not a green source.
Okay.
Not a green source and no shuffler.
No. So I think you actually have to pull the trigger on the other brainstorm here, right?
Maybe not.
Have to,
maybe not at the end of turn. You might be able to wait until your main phase to get a card deeper,
right? So
that you don't run the risk of brainstorm locking yourself like you did on this turn.
Sure. I mean, it's a terrible feeling to cast the brainstorm here. It's just a question of, like, can you actually afford to, to take that extra draw step? And he's just gonna fire it off. Gonna respond to Blighted Agent.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Gonzalo's going to go for a Force of Will here, right?
Yeah,
like
he has to.
Yeah, he probably has to stop this Blighted Agent. And, like, what else are you saving Force of Will for, exactly? So he brainstorms first to get a little more information. Like, if he hit a green land, could he keep, like, all the Shardless agents and just get rid of the brainstorm?
Yeah, if he hits a green land, then he can put the Ancestral Visions on top. And then... Or did he have an Ancestral?
I don't think he had an Ancestral.
Okay.
I think he put back...
looking at that brainstorm.
I think he put back another Shardless agent and a Tarmogoyf.
Okay. Either way, that Force of Will not going to resolve. Matthew has Force of his own. So gets to keep his creatures. Gets to poke in for one. Gonzalo, one Infect, facing down 3 threats. This game has not gone as planned for Gonzalo, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a lot of the right cards, but he's just kind of suffering some mana issues.
Yeah, and fires off a third Brainstorm. This one does find a green source and a Shuffler, the same card. Polluted Delta, which can find Bayou or Tropical Islands. So is going to be able to cast that Tarmogoyf. We might be at the point where casting Tarmogoyf doesn't do enough, although it's a start. I think that any game plan that gets you back into this game, it's going to be kind of a multi-step process.
You only have 1 Infect so far, but you are facing down 3 threats. And you basically need to deal with all 3 of those threats, otherwise they're probably going to race you.
Yeah.
And like you said, Tarmogoyf is a start. It takes care of the Glistener Elf. That's step 1.
Mm-hmm. So... Glistener Elf's the easy one, because any creature more or less answers it.
Yeah.
Blighted Agent, harder still, but any removal spell deals with it. And then you need a kind of a specific subset of answers for the Inkmoth Nexus. So.
Yep. And it looked like Matthew just drew a second Inkmoth Nexus. So barring something like Pithing Needle, that's going to be really difficult for him to deal with all these things.
And Pithing Needle, I think, is going to be... does he actually? He has 1.
He has 1 Needle, 1 Knight of Soul's Betrayal.
All right.
And then potentially a Golgari Charm if Matthew gets a little careless.
Sure. Golgari Charm would be real good here. So, going to spin the wheel. Shardless Agent into... Nope. Yeah, okay. Into 3 fresh ones, so... Not the worst thing that could happen, but I think you actually have to cast spells that affect the board this turn.
Yeah, drawing cards is nice, but ultimately you need stuff that affects the board.
Yeah. And we saw Flash of Force of Will. Is there a blue card to go with that?
Looks like just a lot of Golgari removal spells. 2 Abrupt Decays and a Maelstrom Pulse.
So shields are down here. Blighted Agent and Nexus have free reign to go crazy. But I don't think actually Matthew has anything to punish except for just more difficult to block threats. Inkmoth Nexus is going to take to the air, join Blighted Agent, knock Gonzalo, well, deal the 4th and 5th Infect damage to Gonzalo. Another Inkmoth Nexus going to come down right behind, and actually a third one drawn.
I think things are getting worse by each turn that passes for Gonzalo.
Absolutely.
He's doing his best to dig himself out of the hole that he was in the first few turns, and he's getting close, right? He drew a bunch of removal spells, but those Inkmoth Nexuses are very difficult for this deck to deal with.
Yeah. Fortunately, as we were discussing, a lot of his answers to Inkmoth Nexus actually just always answer all the Inkmoth Nexuses.
Right.
So he has removal for this Blighted Agent, so that's not a problem. He has blockers for the Glistener Elf, so that's not a problem. And then if he finds on his next draw step Needle, Knight of Soul's Betrayal, Golgari Charm, I think any of those three, and he's in fantastic shape.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
He also has to not die in the meantime. And so, there we go. Abrupt Decay. Kills off the Blighted Agent. And gonna go swinging. Yeah, so those creatures aren't doing anything.
So Matthew has the opportunity here to use Berserk on Tarmogoyf to actually kill it.
Okay, and if he does that, he would he would take 10 this turn. So that doesn't actually like help you in any sense. It's still a 2-turn clock no matter what.
So we have some life total changes. I'm not sure what life he was at exactly before this attack, right? Okay, so yeah, so he was at 17 before.
Ah, okay. All right, so we'd already adjusted for, I gotcha.
Yep.
All right. Okay, so yeah, in that case, yeah, I think that it is actually, you're going from a 3-turn clock to a 4-turn clock.
Yeah, and that's one of the secret hidden modes on Berserk, right?
Yeah.
The one that actually just kills Tarmogoyf.
Mm-hmm. One of the last times I watched Infect doing written coverage, I covered JD Neer in the quarterfinals of Providence. He was playing Infect, and he won a game by berserking a meddling mage that was turning off his invigorates.
You got careless, son.
Yeah.
You attacked with that meddling mage.
Yeah, the game was locked up as long as you didn't attack. So Noble Hierarch to draw from Matthew. That is not going to close things out. It's going to help.
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, it gave him the same clock this turn, but next turn it provides the additional mana source to fire up all 3 Nexuses and get in the last 3 points of Infect damage. So this is the turn where Gonzalo needs to draw something.
Yep. And what does he find? What was that one?
That's an Ancestral Vision.
Right on time.
So he has an out here. He can activate or use Maelstrom Pulse to destroy the Noble Hierarch. And if Matthew doesn't draw a pump spell or another mana source, he still has a turn.
Okay. Matthew just calmly peeks. Doesn't show us, but he knows what's up. Activates 1, activates 2. Yeah, okay, you get another turn. Gonzalo to 9. And at this point, Golgari Charm is no longer an out. Or in this, it buys you a turn, but it is not going to shut things out the way that it would have before, I think. Seal of Primordium, likewise, that doesn't help you here. Again, Matthew has the win on the table if he wants to swing for it.
Yeah, but how sick would it be if Gonzalo had the seal, drew the Golgari Charm, right? And then it's like Matthew needs to activate 2 Nexuses to get around the seal, and then he gets to blow him out with the Golgari Charm.
That would be pretty good.
Right.
I think there's maybe, there's no way to play around that other than giving Gonzalo an extra turn.
Yeah.
But Matthew goes for it. Gonzalo doesn't have it, extends the hand. And Matthew Webster on to our top 8, joining Brad Nelson and Todd Anderson as one of the 3
So is Matthew locked in?